And of course, the lines are open. What do you make of the judgment earlier today from the North Gauteng High Court ruling that President Jacob Zuma is compelled now to hand over all reasoning reports that informed his decision to reshuffle cabinet and primarily fire Pravin Gordhan and his deputy, Mcebisi Jonas. And joining us in studio, we have Sfiso Mahlangu, resident political analyst for ANN7, and Botsang Muilwa. We also have Dr. Nuora Okonkwo, legal expert. And you're most welcome. Give us a ring on 011-542-2186. Gentlemen, good evening to you. And Dr. Okonkwo, I'll just start from a legal perspective. Where the separation of power, there's a concern now the president is essentially stripped of his prerogative to appoint or not to appoint, and that his decisions will necessarily be questioned by a court of law. Before we get to you, I believe your mic is not ready yet. So help us through this. What happens now? Does the president now report to the opposition in a sense?
Essentially what the court has said is that the office of the presidency of South Africa has become a ceremonial office for President Jacob Zuma. He's just a ceremonial president because he cannot stand by his decision. In fact, he cannot exercise his constitutional responsibility or his constitutional right to change his cabinet. What this means essentially is that President Zuma is reporting to the opposition. One must always remember, Cindy, when dealing with the law, that the law is open to interpretation. 63% of the population voted for President Jacob Zuma. If he exercises his mandate that 63% of the population of this country gave him, and the court overrules that, in fact, what this means is that President Jacob Zuma is now reporting to the Democratic Alliance. What does that mean with the voter, the 63% who voted for him? I think it is an assault on the electorate, because people have voted for the ANC, and those that have voted do find that their president cannot exercise the mandate that they have given him. The issue of separation of powers is very important, but I think the court in this case has overstepped its right because it has assumed itself higher than the judiciary and higher than the executive. In retrospect, if President Zuma were to respond and say he as the state president is higher than the judiciary, or the executive is higher than the judiciary, this country would be a mess. I think the court has played into the wrong corner this time, and it really looks like the court here is representing the Democratic Alliance, and President Jacob Zuma and his executive have to respond to the Democratic Alliance. It, in fact, is an insult on democracy and an insult on the voter.
Yeah, let's just pick up on that in the constitutional duty of the president by virtue of representing a constituency of no less than at least 11 million voters, if you take the recent local elections results for the ANC. Dr. Okonkwo, what is your reaction to what has now transpired in court regarding President Zuma having to give reasons and the rationale behind the reshuffle and primarily firing the finance minister and his deputy?
Well, basically, if we should look at the decision of the court, what the judge is saying is granted an application rule for the president to divulge his reasons for the decision he took. Well, the president is hiding under section 92 paragraph 1, which gives him authority to enthrone ministers, at the same time dismiss them. Now, he has a constitutional right to challenge the decision, which is one way to it. So he has until 5 days, and I believe he should exercise that option. So let's see the decision after the SCA or the full bench, okay, to hear it and go to the SCA, and then it ends at the Concord. Okay, the most important thing is that in a democracy, you have a right to challenge anybody's decision, even if it's that of the presidency. We have seen it happen in the UK under Margaret Thatcher when she was summoned by the House of the Upper House to explain the decision of the English intervention on the Falklands War. It also happened in the case of American former President Bill Clinton when he was called to explain his behavior in the Monica Lewinsky situation. So the president is not seen to be seen as above the law in a democratic setting such as South Africa. However, the test of the matter of the ruling is subject to being what? Tested. So let's see within the duration of the judgment on what the response of the presidency would be.
I mean, some had said, you know, maybe the president should just give in, as it were, and submit the required documents, whether the report exists or not, but at least give some summation as to how he came to the decision. What is your view?
Good evening, Cindy, and the gentlemen and your viewers. I do not think so. You see, I think the constitution of the country is being undermined and raped in this instance. The very same courts, the very same opposition parties that are always crying that the president and the ANC and whoever is not respecting the constitution, they are themselves disrespecting it. The constitution is very clear in this instance, and I respect what Dr. Okongo has said regarding democratic rights, and people have a democratic right to question the president of the country. But a democratic right should not be used recklessly. It does not mean then people should start abusing courts like the opposition is doing, disregarding the constitution and going to court for matters which are very clear in the constitution. Now, I don't think the president should actually go and defend this matter or respond to the DA because he will be succumbing to the opposition party. What he should do is the latter statement of Dr. Kong. He should actually file a motion of refusing to respond, but to say the court did not, to challenge the decision of the court. That's what I mean to say. The court did not act or make a decision properly in this instance. Let it take forever if it takes forever. The DA also, when you look at it, Cindy, there has been cabinet reshuffles in this country from 1994 under the same constitution to today. They never went to court. What is the, and somebody will say, yeah, but because they never went to court, it does not mean they can't go now. But what are we looking at? It is not about Zuma. It's about the president of the country making a decision as empowered by the constitution of the country. So are they questioning Zuma the person, or are they questioning the constitution of this country, which at the beginning I said they are actually raping the constitution of the country?
Yeah, Tsepo Radima is joining us as our political analyst. Is this empowering or crippling the democracy, especially in light of separation of powers and the executive now being stripped of his in making prerogative decisions that are enshrined in the Constitution?
Look, certainly what we've seen today, I think it's a timely reminder that judges are both mortal and fallible, and that there are many times whereby they can misinterpret what the law is, and hence there is always this possibility to appeal a decision to a higher court. And when we take into account the judgment that was handed down today, well, we were not given reasons. So effectively, the judge gave an order without reasons. The ratio decidandi is going to be key or fundamental in say, well, what factors did the judge consider in actually reaching this type of a judgment, which I think many legal commentators would assert that it is legally untenable and therefore will itself stand to be set aside by a higher court if it is put on appeal. But I think also it's important to realize that the relentless campaign by the Democratic Alliance to effectively want to turn the courts into political activists as well as a superior branch of the state is itself an onslaught on the Constitution of the Republic. There is absolutely no reading that anyone can make into the provision as to how ministers are both appointed, reshuffled, as well as dismissed, other than what is provided for in the Constitution. And the Constitution is very expressive and very clear. The president doesn't have to furnish any reasons of any kind, and it will be, I think, a mountain to climb for the judge in his reasons to be able to adduce the grounds. And what they had relied on, it's puzzling that they relied on that Rule 53, which effectively makes the president in this particular instance a administrative functionary instead of the executive. And that itself, the Constitution clearly does not allow. We hope that the president's office will immediately take all measures necessary to appeal this legally untenable judgment.
All right, Dr. Okonkwo, just going back to Rule 53, for our viewers who may not have been watching court proceedings earlier on, that argue that the court is now entitled, for administrative purposes, they require the necessary documents, the reasons, and the report to make a further ruling on whether President Zuma's acts or actions were legitimate or legally astute, as it were. In your view, is the opposition, in simple terms, entitled to have reasons and the report based on Zuma's reshuffling?
Like I said earlier on, there's a preamble that lists an order. The preamble is that the court has decided to set aside calling the ruling, the reshuffling of the cabinet by the president to be irrational and unlawful. Okay. Now, the test of the matter in the ruling lies on the following facts. Are they saying that the president does not have constitutional authority to make such announcement? If that's what they're saying, then they are making a mockery and exhibiting a high level of ignorance. Okay, that's why you have what you call a bias ruling, or a bias judgment, which can, be challenged. So my question is, if the DA is facing the government on issues of administrative, constitutional balances that he has rise to, let's look at other critical issues where they are keeping moot on. What of the competitions committee, where the banks are seen to have faulted? Have they taken the banks to court? That's number one. Number two, what have they been doing on the case of their own party person that commented foully on racism? Where is it today? How many other people have taken them to court? So let there be a precedent that is basic for us to move further. Okay, I see this as a personal attack on the presidency. So I believe that the president legal team, within the 5 days, should challenge this. And for me, basically, I don't see it having a local standing. Because if you look at the separation of powers, what does it mean that the judiciary, executive, and legislative are functioning independently against each other? Each have different roles to play. So he has exercised an executive decision which has given him the powers to do that. If you go to chapter 5 of the Constitution, and if you look at 92.1, he has the mandate to do that. So I don't understand on the foot they are standing. It could go far to Concord, but I see the president having his day at the end of the day.
Can I just come in? I'm glad he's mentioning that he's seeing it to go to Concord at the end. It is only the Constitutional Court that can make a proper ruling
on that.
Of this.
Yes.
Only the Constitutional Court, because the Constitution is being questioned at the moment of the country. I've said it's personal, but we should be very wary as a nation that, you see, the opposition parties have lost the plot. They have parliament where they could have raised this issue, and we know that they have filed a motion of no confidence in the president, and those are the platforms that they can use to say whether it was wrong or not. To try and rely on Section 53, Rule 53 that says it's an administrative issue. There's nothing administrative about this. Why, when Pravin Gordhan is being removed from the position, and people have been removed before, he has been removed before. Now, because we should recall that Pravin Gordhan on the 15th of December 2015 was imposed actually on the president by the business sector and the opposition. It is becoming clear and clear every day, actually, that they are going to do everything, and I hope the president is ready for this. They are going to use every ammunition and everything under the sun to discredit him, to make sure that the president is on the news for all the wrong reasons until come December 27. It's part of politics. It's part of the opposition trying to unseat a sitting president of the country. But what is dangerous is that courts are captured in this instance. You look at how a judge can make such a decision when the rule and the law is very clear. And it's very clear, people are afraid to stand up and say, our judiciary is still white dominated. Our judiciary is still based on the old Roman Dutch law and some apartheid rules. Now there's a constitutional rule of a constitutional democracy. They are disregarding that. But they are respecting all other laws which were inherited from the Roman Dutch laws, from the apartheid rules. They never disregard those rules. They're disregarding a rule that is modern, to what is called the New South Africa.
Yeah.
They are disregarding. He has mentioned a number of elements from DA, what Helen Zille has said. DA has never stood up with its followers and people and questioned why are black majority people in this country still landless, which is a constitutional question. But they are focusing on Jacob Zuma, one individual exercising his constitutional right. And by the way, Cindy, you earlier said 11 million people plus have voted Zuma into that position. No, it's not. Zuma is not representing 11 million people who voted the ANC. He's representing over 50 million South Africans. Whether we like him or not, it's immaterial. But he's the head of a constitutional democracy.
Yeah, I just want to go back to why Pravin Gordhan, and I know it's in the constitution with regards to the financial sector generally. But as you've said, there has been other ministers. Why, wasn't there a court case when Nhlanhla Nene, or maybe President buckled under pressure very soon before the process even started? But maybe give us just a summary. Why particularly the protection around Pravin Gordhan in your view?
Well, because Mr. Gordhan raised what he called a copy of the intelligence report cited as one of the reasons for his exit. We must remember, Cindy, that there's three forms of intelligence in this country. There is police intelligence, there is state security that can also relate to international intelligence and or plus military intelligence. What Mr. Pravin Gordhan raised is a piece of paper to which he said at the press conference was an intelligence report. Now, if the DA would take President Zuma to court to say he must provide the reasons to why he had to reshuffle his cabinet, it means to them the intelligence report is part of that bundle of documents. This is a document that they will use in future. So no one knows the contents and the details of that intelligence report, if there is. I have not heard from the president at any given moment that there is an intelligence report, and he has not cited his reasons. What we are aware of is that he was exercising his duties. I attended the press conference where Mr. Mantashe spoke, and he said they were aware of the reshuffle long before it happened. In fact, Ms. Jesu Duarte sat on my show Straight Talk and said they were informed of a cabinet reshuffle in 2016. They said they had been aware that the relationship between President Jacob Zuma and Mr. Pravin Gordhan had broken down irretrievably and irreversibly. In fact, they called it a divorce. So the Democratic Alliance jumping onto the bandwagon is simply to have a bundle of evidence that they can use against the president or against members of the ANC. I don't think it's about the reshuffle per se. Mr. Gordhan was not the only member of cabinet who was reshuffled. There's been many other. But you won't hear people talk about Ms. Jumat Peterson, you won't hear people talk about Ms. Dipuo Peters. It will be precisely around Mr. Pravin Gordhan because he represented a narrative that many opposition parties enjoyed. And if one then has to speak about an intelligence report, you see that is sensational and that is juicy. That can get you a lot of television ratings and that can get you a lot of votes at the polls if you use it in the right campaign method. And so they will perpetuate that card. But at the end of the day, they don't have congruent evidence on why they can tell President Zuma to supply reasons for his reshuffle. Many presidents called upon their cabinets, they reshuffled them. President Mbeki did it. Why now? And so it seems like a political ploy, but the injury to democracy is the fact that all politicians can play games. Now they have used the judiciary, what is supposed to be a trusted organ that represents South Africans. Now it has come and become a tennis ball in a political game. I don't know how South Africans are going to arise from this and trust that the courts will represent them fairly when the courts in this country look like they will be on the ballot box. Surely in 2019 people must come and elect the court because it seems like it has become a neutral political party, a governing party after the DA.
All right, very briefly, Dr. Okonkwo, as we close, will the courts be satisfied? That is assuming that the president will submit to the demands of the Gauteng High Court and essentially say that this was a party political decision and that it is his prerogative, it's constitutionally within his rights to reshuffle, and there's no report, but the submission that he's making is that it is an advice that was taken as a collective to fulfill the radical economic transformation agenda. I'm just saying, will the courts be satisfied with that, or does he have to somehow produce a report, albeit that one may not exist?
Like I said earlier on, and I'm going back again, in Oscar Pistorius versus the state, a judgment was given by a high court, which was overturned by the Supreme Court and sent back to the court for what? Sentencing. Okay. Chris Haney's killer was pardoned by the president of one of his functions, okay, which is section 84(2) paragraph I, which gives him the right to do that. I mean, why didn't the opposition, DA, go on board and say, hey, what you did was wrong, and go to court? Okay, so he has the mandate. Remember, this man is seen over a lot of things. It's just like al-Bashir matter, the International Court of The Hague. Okay, you are treading on the sovereignty of a nation. Why have we not asked ourselves a question? It's only sitting black African presidents that are summoned today. Tell me, what George Bush did in Iraq, who has summoned him for that? What England did in the Falkland, who has summoned him for that? And that's why I respect the former United Nations Secretary General. He told George Bush, I'm not going to follow you and repair a process we are not part of. Okay, so what are we basically saying? There are methods to challenge and dismiss such rulings. And I believe that the presidency with its legal team would follow that. So that's why I leave it at. It's because it's a legal matter and should be dealt with legally, irrespective of whatever we say here. Right. He still has to respond. Yeah.
Tsepo Khadima, just what Dr. Okonkwo was saying is that this is more ominous than essentially a legal or technical process. It is a threat to the sovereignty of this nation.
Look, read it this way. The Democratic Alliance confessed today that their main reason for this course of action is to effectively get their hands on the so-called intelligence report, and one can see that they are actually acting on behalf of foreign powers who are probably trying to determine to what extent they've been implicated or to what extent they've been found guilty in terms of that intelligence report. But the courts, it is not their job to be doing politics, because their continuous posture of having an overreach will create conditions of self-help, and that is anarchy.
Now the disempowerment, I mean, I just want to go back to, so that our viewers understand what is really at play here. It's not necessarily defending any particular party or supporting any party. Legally, what has been breached, not only from the courts in dictating to Parliament, but the position of a statesman, the head of state, being questioned. What does it all imply, Episode?
Cindy, this implies that actually, as Fizo had said earlier on, courts are no longer playing the role that they're supposed to play. They are players in the political spectrum of the country at the moment. A court of law that is supposed to be the custodian of the constitution of the country, although it's not a constitutional court, but it's still a court of law that falls under the constitutional court, goes and disregards the constitution of the court. And actually, you know, I went quickly to look at the background of the judge who was presiding over this case, an experienced legal person who has been there all along. And I have a problem with that. How do we have confidence in that? But it is also not only disrespecting the Constitution. It is actually a slap on the face of the South African people who are relying on this Constitution to can be governed and treated properly. The story that the DA is going to use a so-called intelligence report, Cindy, it is not going to fly. The president never cited that report. I don't understand why the former minister, Mr. Pravin, is referred to this report when, on the other hand, he stands up and says He was never consulted. He actually never met the president since he was recalled from an overseas trip. So when and where did the president cite the so-called intelligence report, which the State Security Agency has already said it's not their report? The president never mentioned it. Who brought this report? I'm starting to believe that Mr. Pravin and the DA and other opposition, they may have cooked that report. If the state doesn't say, it says it's not their report, the president never mentioned it, so whose report it is? But again, I've said earlier, we don't have to even rub and scratch our heads how this case will go in court. The decision is illogical in my view, it's illegal. The president must not even submit, or the president must not even submit any documents in this regard. The Constitution is very clear. It is his prerogative. He was actually kind to go to the ANC leadership, as they always do, and inform them that he is no longer having a good working relationship with the Minister of Finance. But why the Minister of Finance? Why about other ministers? You know, we should not be shy, Cindy, to stand up and say, this is a battle and a political war to try and keep Pravin Gordhan as the hero of finance in this country, to try and make sure that he never departed that seat. Well, unfortunately, he will not come back.
Yeah. Okay, but I mean, the president is known to be a master in chess, and I'm sure he would have preempted somehow the move of his opponent. One would assume, based on his advisors, when he reshuffled the cabinet, and what is at his disposal at the moment. He can't just be in contempt and not respond. You know, he has to either give the information if there is, or rather appeal in court.
Well, I think, Cindy, the call to remove Minister Pravin Gordhan was a call from many to say in this country we need a radical economic transformation. The battle that has been headed here has been the battle of white monopoly capital still running the South African economy. And I think a man had to arise to say, if the gloves have to come off, let that be the case. But we shall finally make South Africans partakers of the economy that is theirs. It is President Jacob Zuma who called for expropriation of land without compensation. It was the ANC MPs who rejected that call. They also rejected Mr. Julius Malema's advance of 6% in order to give them the ability to amend the Constitution. And so this is not just a battle against a man, the individual. It is a call to stand against radical economic transformation, because President Zuma said he was going to pick a leader who would do that. Just to cite one example, radical economic transformation is not new. Perhaps they coined this word recently, but the submission has never been new. It is called the second phase of our freedom. The first was political, the second is economic. A department like Ms. Lindiwe Zulu's Department of Small Business Development, Mr. Pravin Gordhan continued to give Ms. Zulu the lowest budget ever, not increasing it according to the model of radical economic transformation to create black industrialists. So I think the ministers and cabinet had to realize and say, we need a man who can support, in terms of budget, the call for radical economic transformation. And Mr. Gordhan was not that man.
Yeah.
The desire for the opposition to keep him in office is a fledge in the spinal cord of white monopoly capital. Because if you're going to lose wealth that you've inherited and you've kept from apartheid into the government of national unity, coming into the ANC government, the first threat of losing those riches, you've got to fight with everything you have. So this is not just a call against Mr. President Zuma, and in fact it has nothing against the personality of Mr. Malusi Gigaba. It is against blacks finally becoming a part of the South African economy.
Okay, we know the stakes are very high in creating that egalitarian society, and at the two ends of the spectrum is white monopoly capital, radical economic transformation. But coming back to what the president has at his disposal, Dr. Okonkwo, if the laws that he can use to appeal this particular judgment, earlier you had spoken about this being a biased judgment that can be contested in another court.
Why do I say that should be the question? One, if the motion that the DA brought in the court, not in the North Carolina High Court, is that the basis for his reshuffling is wrong and brings reasons of facts, it makes sense. But when it's centered on an individual, where there are many individuals that we are also part of the reshuffle, it gives me an eyebrow to see that it's a bit suspicious. Okay, if a president is within his jurisdictional boundaries to do that, as it encapsulated in the Constitution, Section 92, Paragraph 1, clearly gives him the mandate to appoint ministers, cabinet, and as well dismiss. I don't understand on which basis. He owes nobody any apology for that. He is the numero uno of the country. He has a right to recall you, to put you back. You understand? And that's why he said it is only the ANC can recall him. And we saw it happen during Mbeki. He was recalled. That's an internal issue. But for an opposition to bring another party's matter to this, have we asked, why didn't the ANC take DA to court to recall their leader DA for Helezile's statement? Looking at it from that context. So for me, like I earlier on said, this is now a legal issue. And there are so many options available within the presidency to throw this out. And one of them is challenging the decision. That's why there are different or higher courts. And for me, it's a constitutional issue. You understand?
You know, Cindy, these court processes are very expensive in the country. And it is becoming clearer and clearer to some of us that the DA is sitting on a very comfortable, well-funded position. That's why they spend more time in courts than in parliament and in the cabinet. There's a pusher of money. There's somebody pumping money into DA to make all these cases of going to court and then citing constitutional right and all those things. But again, when we sit down, I still emphasize the fact that the president should not respond, not contempt the court, no, not that, but he should not respond by providing reasons, because the Constitution is very clear that he doesn't have to give any reasons for doing that. Trying to say it's an administrative issue and the economy of the country. You know, I listened to the DA leader earlier on, who was saying they are pushing this thing to happen very fast before end of June, because by that period, the raters agencies, the Moody's, they'll be in another mood come that period. They can downgrade the country. And it is very clear that their focus, as much as the court papers are focusing on a reshuffle of the cabinet, but their focus is on one position. One minister who was reshuffled. He was not fired, he was reshuffled. It happens to all other ministers. Now, it is not their interest, as Fisher had said, to see the treasury of this country being dislocated from being controlled by white capital. And when I say the treasury, I don't even talk only about the Department of Finance. I'm talking about all other key agencies. The South African Reserve Bank, which is in the hands of foreign white capital. The way banks are running amok and, you know, breaking every law of this country. The Treasury fair, Mr. Pravin Gordhan. All these things about banks happened and reported and exposed under his leadership. What did he do? Nothing. If I was a head of state, and I've said it before he was fired, and I've said it when he was fired, I've said it 2 days before he was fired that he is going. And the only reason I said that, it's not because I had prior information that Pravin Gordhan will be fired on a certain day. It is because I looked at his performance, his conduct, the way he was doing his job towards the radical economic transformation. It was not in line with what the ANC say. It was not in line with what is happening in the country, whereby the best interest of the poor black majority are not being put in front by this minister. All the things he was focusing on were business activities, were banks. It was not issues like funding water of the country, funding the poor, funding the SMMEs. It was not all that.
Sorry, but we're almost out of time. Tsepo, you know, the panelists essentially saying that the DA's actions are not noble in trying to protect the best interests of this country by questioning the reshuffle of Pravin Gordhan and Mcebisi Jonas, that there is more sinister plans, that of protecting the status quo where the haves and the white monopoly enjoys the protection, including the monopoly in various sectors of society.
Well, it's clear that they are acting on behalf of interest parties or third parties, both domestic and foreign, And you can look at it whether it is with regard to the economy that is concentrated into very few hands, or with regard to other foreign powers that want to control this nation. But I think on the issue of Moody's review coming up for a credit rating, we have to bear in mind this, that during Minister Gordon's tenure, South Africa was downgraded twice. So we were given a warning shot or a warning first time around. We became unrepentant. Our behavior did not change. Second time, our behavior continued to change. There was absolutely no way we could not have been downgraded purely because we never changed behavior. And what is that behavior? South Africa, we are living beyond our means. We are not able to afford even now to repay the debt that we owe, let alone even service the interest that we owe. The economy is not growing, and even the pedestrian growth that this economy is having is shedding jobs, not creating jobs. And you can also take into account that in the last 15 years, during the periods where we had 3-4% economic growth, again, it was economic growth that was not creating jobs. So this is unfortunately a cocktail of disasters that the chickens had to come home to roost at some point in time, and they have come home to roost. So the DA cannot sustain their argument that Pravin Gordhan was doing an excellent job, because in fact he was doing a terrible job, and nobody has been able to actually dispute with objective facts our assertion that Pravin Gordhan was doing a terrible job, and that in fact as a country we will cease to be a sovereign state long from now, unless the new minister Malusi Gigaba really addresses these issues that we are raising on a daily basis, that he must refinance our debt, he must have a balanced budget. He cannot continue to say that the budget that was delivered by Pravin Gordhan has to stay without any changes, because everything else has changed. In fact, if anything, our interest costs have gone up, and all the three credit rating agencies, unless we radically change our behavior or we repent, we are going to end up with a situation whereby even our rand-denominated debt is itself downgraded, and that is going to be calamity for the many in this country.
All right, Sepa, we're going to have to leave it there. Just to quickly recap on the rationale, the DA saying the president should have foreseen the consequences, the downgrade and the economy, etc. Dr. Konkwa, we'll just wrap it up there in what he does next, because South Africans, or some, may be concerned that indeed the DA's rationale around this motion is the correct one.
First of all, who determines what is rationale? Who? They are determining it to be rationale. An executive decision was taken, which was rationale, from the executive authority that has the mandate to do that authority. So you are challenging what is constitutionally provided for somebody to... Let's take, for instance, this is ANN7. You must have an editorial base, you must have chains of actions, and then you have a leader who gives down the instruction. Now, the leader is empowered through employment. Now, this leader is empowered through the ballot boxes and has given such rights to do that and has taken a decision. You are questioning it. This is not the first and only, and will still be, the cabinet reshuffle. So what are you saying?
So you're saying there's really no rationale, unless you want to see a bit beyond the veneer.
I think if we want to discuss rationale, it's going to be a difficult mindset for the president to explain his mind of development within this country. When dealing with a legal matter, the law is in place so that democracy might thrive. The law has been put in place so that the constitutional democracy of this country might thrive. We don't have a democracy in order for the law to have superiority over people. The law in this country is there, it exists so that democracy is there, so that we live in a non-racial, in a non-sexist country. And if we have a law and a legal system that seems to perpetuate itself beyond or above the individuals or the majority of that country. We're
out of time. So I know I've said this repeatedly, but we have to leave it there.
You know, the
Make it
issue
10 seconds.
Of rationale, I disagree with the two. I think there is rationale. If you've got a national program to develop and promote black people or the poor people of this country economically, because they were disadvantaged. And you have a minister who is standing in front of that program. That is rational.
Okay,
If
we're
we
going to
will
leave it
sit
there.
here in future.
Botsang Muilwa, political analyst, Tsepo Khadima, also joining us, Fiso Mahlangu, ANN7 residential political analyst, and Dr. Nwara Okonkwo, legal expert. And thanks so much to you at home, our most important panelists, for joining this discussion. We continue with other stories.